98%. That's the percentage of people in prison who have experienced at least one significant traumatic event in their childhood. It's a number so huge, it's almost hard to grasp. It's easy to hear a statistic like that, nod, agree that it's a tragedy, and then just move on. But what does it really mean? What happens inside a child's mind when their world is shattered by abuse or neglect? How does a life that starts with scraped knees and bedtime stories so often end up behind bars, filed away as a number in a system that almost never asks why? We live in a world of headlines. We see the mugshots, we hear the charges, and we judge the crime. It's a story told in black and white. Good versus evil, law versus chaos, us versus them. But that story is missing its beginning. It starts at the very end with the crime itself and ignores the thousands of days that came before it. It's a story that looks at a person and asks, "What is wrong with you?" Today, we're going to ask a different question. It might be an uncomfortable question, but it's the only one that matters if we ever want to understand where crime really comes from. That question is, what happened to you? We're going to explore the heartbreaking, real-life pathways that lead from a child's bedroom to a prison cell. We'll look at the science and the stories to see how the invisible wounds of trauma can quietly rewrite a child's future, replacing it with a blueprint for survival that the rest of the world calls crime. This isn't about excusing behavior. It's about understanding it, so we can finally start to break the cycle. When we think about crime, we usually think about choice. A person chooses to break the law. They weigh the options, consider the consequences, and make a call. That idea is the foundation of our entire justice system. It's simple, it's clean, and honestly, it's comforting. It draws a clear line between people who follow the rules and people who don't. But what if that choice isn't so simple? What if the brain that's supposed to be making that choice has been completely rewired? What if the very circuits that manage impulse control, decision-making, and our emotions were damaged long before any crime was ever committed? The path to a life of crime is rarely a sharp, sudden turn. More often, it's a long, slow drift downstream that begins in the first few years of life. Children aren't born bad. They're born needing safety, stability, and love, and those aren't just nice ideas. They're the essential ingredients for building a healthy brain. When those ingredients are missing, replaced with fear, violence, or neglect, the architecture of a child's mind is compromised. Child abuse and other severe traumas don't just leave emotional scars. They inflict deep biological wounds. They throw the brain's stress response systems out of whack, leaving them stuck on high alert. Imagine living every single moment like you're in immediate danger. Your heart races, your muscles are tense, and your focus narrows to one thing: survival. This is the daily reality for countless kids in traumatic homes. Their bodies are flooded with stress hormones like cortisol, which over time becomes toxic to the parts of the brain needed for learning, empathy, and self-control. This isn't a metaphor. It's neurobiology. Research shows that chronic trauma can physically change the brain. The amygdala, the brain's fear center, can grow larger and become overactive. At the same time, the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that's supposed to be the CEO, in charge of planning, thinking about consequences, and managing emotions, can show less activity and even shrink. The part of the brain that should be saying, "Hang on, let's think about this," is essentially offline. So, when a teenager with this kind of background acts impulsively or reacts with aggression to something they see as a threat, or turns to drugs to quiet the storm inside their own head, is it just a bad choice? Or is it, at least in part, the predictable result of a brain that was shaped by survival? This is the messy reality that the simple story of good versus evil completely misses. And it's the reality we have to face if we want to understand the people who end up on the wrong side of the law. Their journey didn't start with a choice to become a criminal. It started in a childhood where they were a victim. To see how this actually plays out, let's follow a story. This isn't one specific person, but a story built from the common threads in thousands of real case studies. We'll call him Michael. Michael's first memories weren't of fear, they were of sunlight. He remembers how it felt on the living room floor while he built crooked towers out of blocks. He remembers the sound of his mother's laughter, a sound that filled their small apartment. For those first few years, Michael's world was safe. He had a favorite blue blanket, a worn-out book about a runaway bunny, and the unquestioned belief that he was loved. He was a bright kid, always asking questions, chasing bugs in the grass, and crying like any kid does. When he fell and scraped his knee, his mom was always there to scoop him up and make it better. His world made sense. Then, when Michael was 6, the world stopped making sense. It wasn't one event. It was a slow unraveling. His father, a quiet but steady presence, lost his job. The arguments started, first as whispers, then as shouts that shook the thin walls. His mother's laughter became rare. Then, his father was gone. A new man moved in, a man with heavy footsteps and a quick temper. The sunlight in the living room seemed to disappear. The new man's presence was a constant, low buzz of a threat. The first time he hit Michael, it was for spilling a glass of milk, a hard, stinging slap that left a red mark on his face and a deeper one on his soul. He learned that night that the rules had changed. Crying didn't bring comfort anymore. It brought more anger. The only way to survive was to become small, to become invisible. His mother, trapped in her own fear, seemed to fade away. She was there, but not really. Her eyes were distant, her touch was mechanical. The warmth was gone. To Michael, this felt like a profound abandonment. Researchers call this emotional neglect, and its effects can be just as toxic as physical abuse. It's the absence of what a child desperately needs, the reassurance, the connection, the feeling of being seen. For a child, that absence is a kind of death. At school, the change was obvious. The boy who loved asking questions now sat silently. At the back of the room, he couldn't focus on lessons about letters and numbers. His brain was elsewhere, listening for the sound of a key in the lock at home, bracing for what the night would bring. His grades fell off a cliff. Teachers called him distracted, lazy, or a troublemaker. When his bottled-up fear and rage would burst out in the schoolyard, a sudden push. A curse, he was punished for the action, but no one ever asked about the feeling that caused it. No one asked what was going on at home. By the time he was a preteen, Michael's whole world was about one thing: managing the chaos. The chaos at home and the chaos inside his own head. Storm of fear, rage, and shame that he had no words for. School wasn't a place for learning anymore. It was a place of failure. He started skipping and found a strange sense of comfort with other kids who seemed just as lost as he was. They didn't talk about their broken homes. They didn't have to. They saw the same look in each other's eyes. In that group, the things that got him in trouble at school, his jumpiness, his quick temper, were assets. They were signs of being tough. For the first time in years, he felt like he belonged. His first arrest was for shoplifting snacks from a convenience store. It wasn't about the food. It was about the thrill, the tiny moment of control in a life that felt completely out of control. When he was caught, the system saw a young delinquent making a bad choice. It saw a crime. It didn't see the 6-year-old who had lost his mother's laughter. It didn't see a kid whose brain was swimming in a toxic soup of stress hormones. It didn't see a victim. It saw a criminal and set him on a path that would be incredibly hard to leave. Michael's story, in all its different forms, is the first chapter in the lives of so many people in our prisons. It's a chapter we have to Read if we want to understand the rest of the book. Michael's story isn't just a tragedy. It's a case study in developmental science. The things that happened to him are what researchers call adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. A massive study, the CDC Kaiser Permanente ACE study, gave us the language to understand just how deep the impact of a tough childhood really is. The study listed 10 specific types of trauma, like physical or emotional abuse, neglect, and growing up in a house with domestic violence, substance abuse, or mental illness. Each one counts as an ACE. Researchers tallied up the ACE scores of over 17,000 adults and compared them to their life outcomes. The results were stunning. First, ACEs are incredibly common. About 2/3 of adults have at least one. But more importantly, the study showed a direct link. The higher your ACE score, the higher your risk for everything from heart disease and depression to addiction. And for our topic, a high ACE score is one of the strongest predictors of ending up in the criminal justice system. A 2024 study found that 46% of men and 57% of women in prison had an ACE score of 4 or more, the level considered significant trauma compared to just a small fraction of the general population. But why? How does a painful childhood lead to a prison sentence years later? The answer is in the developing brain. A child's brain develops based on a use it or lose it principle. The pathways that get used the most get stronger. In a safe home, the pathways for trust and learning are reinforced. But in a home like Michael's, the brain's survival circuits get a relentless workout. The brain's threat detection system has a smoke detector called the amygdala. When it senses danger, it sounds the alarm, triggering the release of stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol to get the body ready to fight or run. It's a brilliant system for escaping a tiger in the wild. But for a child like Michael, the tiger lives in his house. The alarm is always on. This is called toxic stress. That constant flood of cortisol is poison to a developing brain. It can weaken connections and even kill brain cells in critical areas like the hippocampus, which is vital for learning and memory. This helps explain why kids with high ACEs often struggle in school. It's not that they aren't smart. Their brains are biologically blocked from learning well. Even more critical is the damage to the prefrontal cortex, or PFC. This is the brain's center for reasoning and impulse control. It's supposed to act as the brake on the amygdala's hair trigger alarm. But under toxic stress, the brake line gets cut. The smoke detector is always screaming, and the brake pedal doesn't work. The result is a kid, and later an adult, who is highly reactive. They see threats where others don't. They struggle to calm down. They act on impulse without thinking about the consequences. This isn't a moral failure. It's a neurological one. All this inner turmoil leads people to find ways to cope, to numb the pain. Many turn to substance use to feel a sense of power in a world that made them powerless. Some are drawn to aggression to find the belonging they never got at home. They join gangs. Each of these choices is actually a desperate attempt to solve the problem of untreated trauma. This is the science that connects a forgotten childhood to a future crime. It shows us that a criminal act isn't just an isolated incident, but often the final symptom of a long-festering disease that started with a CEs and attacked the very architecture of the brain. For Michael, landing in the criminal justice system wasn't a question of if, but when. The landscape of his mind, scarred by trauma, made that collision almost unavoidable. Let's look at his story again, but with this science in mind. His skipping school wasn't just him being a rebel. It was the sign of a brain struggling to function. His damaged hippocampus made learning frustrating, and his overactive amygdala made the social chaos of a school feel like a constant threat. So, he avoided it. His drifting towards other troubled kids wasn't just a search for friends. It was a survival strategy. In that group, his trauma responses were assets. Being jumpy and paranoid wasn't anxiety. It was being street smart. His explosive anger wasn't a regulation problem. It was a sign of respect. The group became a substitute family that offered clear rules for a hostile world, rules based on aggression and defiance. After his first arrest for shoplifting came others, each one more serious: vandalism, fighting, and eventually a burglary. With every interaction with the justice system, he was labeled and pushed deeper into his new identity as an offender. The system, designed to punish the crime instead of understanding the person, often just makes things worse. For a kid like Michael, who already distrusts authority, punishment confirms his worldview. The world is dangerous, and you have to fight back. For some kids, getting into the system doesn't scare them straight. It just pushes them further down the path. This is where another tragedy comes into play: the cycle of trauma passed down through generations. Children with an incarcerated parent are at a much higher risk of ending up in prison themselves. Some studies suggest that risk increases by 3 to 6 times. This isn't fate. It's the result of the original trauma of a parent being taken away, compounded by the poverty and instability that often follows. The prison system becomes a toxic part of the family tree, repeating itself for generations. By his early 20s, Michael was in an adult prison for assault. The fight started over nothing: a spilled drink, a look he didn't like. But to Michael's trauma-wired brain, it wasn't nothing. It was a threat, and he reacted with the only tool he'd ever learned: overwhelming force. And inside prison, the environment itself is a constant trigger. The loud noises, the rigid authority, the constant threat of violence, it all reactivates the original trauma. The very things he struggles with, his hypervigilance and emotional dysregulation, are now necessary for daily survival. The system, meant to rehabilitate him, instead surrounds him with a perfect echo of the chaotic, dangerous home he grew up in. Michael's journey from a sunny living room to a cold prison cell is a slow-motion tragedy. It's the story of how untreated childhood trauma creates a direct pipeline to prison. The bad choices that landed him there weren't made in a vacuum. They were the desperate, misguided attempts of a wounded child trying to survive in a world that first failed to protect him, and then chose to punish him for his scars. It's easy to hear all this and think the damage is done, that the path is set, but it's not. Not every child who experiences a traumatic childhood is destined for a life of crime. Sometimes, just one stable, caring adult is enough to change everything. To see how, let's look at another story. The story of Maria. Maria's childhood started with a similar list of C's. She grew up in a home torn apart by addiction and violence. She went to bed listening to screams and woke up to tense, unpredictable silence. At school, she was quiet and withdrawn, feeling a constant buzz of anxiety that made it impossible to focus. She was on the exact same path as Michael. The turning point for Maria came in 7th grade, with a teacher named Mr. Evans. Mr. Evans was trained in what's called a trauma-informed approach. This idea completely flips the script from what's wrong with this kid to what happened to this kid, and what do they need. He noticed Maria. He didn't see a lazy student. He saw a scared one. When she didn't turn in her homework, he didn't give her a 0. He quietly asked her if everything was okay at home. When a loud noise in the hall made her flinch, he understood it was a trauma response. He made his classroom a sanctuary of safety. The schedule was always on the board. The rules were clear. He greeted every student at the door with a calm, welcoming face. One day, after a terrible night at home, Maria acted out. She talked back and refused to work. Instead of sending her to the office, Mr. Evans asked her to stay after class. He didn't yell. He just said, you seem like you're having a really tough day. I'm here if you ever want to talk." For the first time, Maria felt seen. Not judged, but truly seen. That small moment of connection became an anchor in the storm of her life. Mr. Evans connected her with the school counselor, who also understood trauma. The counselor didn't push Maria for details. Instead, she taught her simple, practical skills to manage her anxiety, like breathing exercises to calm her down when she felt overwhelmed. This is the key to effective intervention. It's not just about talking about the trauma. It's about rebuilding the brain's ability to regulate itself. These kinds of therapies help young people understand the link between what happened to them and how they feel, and give them a toolkit of coping skills. For Maria, this was life-changing. School slowly went from being a place of fear to a place of refuge. With the tools to manage her anxiety, she could finally focus. With the support of Mr. Evans and her counselor, she started to build a sense of self-worth. She discovered a passion for art, which became a way to express the feelings she couldn't find words for. Maria still carried the scars of her childhood, but they no longer decided her future. She graduated from high school and went on to college. Her path wasn't easy, but the cycle was broken. Maria's story shows us the incredible resilience of the human spirit. When it's met with just a little understanding, it shows that the neurological damage from trauma isn't always permanent. The brain has an amazing ability to change and heal, a quality called neuroplasticity. The right experiences, safe relationships, and therapeutic support can forge new pathways. They can strengthen the prefrontal cortex, calm the amygdala, and restore a sense of balance. The difference between Michael and Maria wasn't how bad their trauma was. It was the presence of a buffer. For Maria, a teacher and a counselor acted as that buffer, shielding her from the worst outcomes and showing her a different path. Her story proves that while we can't always stop trauma from happening, we have the power to step in and lessen its impact. A single, informed, and compassionate adult can be the difference between a statistic and a story of hope. The stories of Michael and Maria show us that we have a choice in how we deal with crime. One path is the one we all know: punishment. It's a road that waits for the crime to happen, for the damage to be done, and then reacts. It isolates, confines, and punishes. It's a system we pour billions of dollars into, and yet, for all that money, it's not working. Recidivism rates are incredibly high. Recent data shows about 2/3 of people are rearrested within 3 years of being released. It's a revolving door that traps people like Michael in a cycle of trauma and prison that gets passed down for generations. Then there's the other path: prevention and healing. This path is more complex. It requires us to look upstream at the source of the problem, instead of just building a dam at the end of it. This is the path of being trauma-informed. It asks every part of our society that deals with kids' schools, healthcare, child welfare, and even the justice system to understand the impact of trauma and create environments that help kids feel safe and heal. In schools, it looks like Mr. Evans. It means training teachers to see the signs of trauma and use strategies that build resilience. It means having mental health support available for students like Maria. It means moving away from zero tolerance policies that punish traumatized kids for their survival behaviors. In healthcare, it means doctors can screen for SCEs during checkups. When a doctor can spot a child with a high ACE score early, they can connect the family with resources before things spiral out of control. It means treating childhood trauma as the major public health crisis it is in the justice system. It means rethinking everything. It means diverting kids away from detention centers and into community programs. For adults like Michael who are already in the system, it means making prisons places of real rehabilitation. That includes providing therapy, addiction treatment, and job training that gives people the skills and the hope they need to build a new life. And I know what some of you are thinking. This sounds expensive. But the truth is, we're already paying. The punishment model costs a fortune. We pay for prisons, for police, for courtrooms. We pay in emergency room visits and chronic health conditions. We pay in the social services needed for the kids left behind, the next generation already at risk. Investing in prevention pays us back. Every child we guide away from the justice system, every cycle of trauma we break, is a huge win for society. This isn't about being soft on crime. It's about being smart. It's about realizing that healthy kids are far less likely to become dangerous adults. It's about finally treating the disease instead of just endlessly and expensively reacting to its symptoms. The path from a forgotten childhood to a prison cell is a devastating one. But as we've seen, it doesn't have to be this way. Understanding the science of trauma gives us a roadmap for change. If this story stuck with you, if it made you think, please share your thoughts in the comments. These are tough conversations. But the more we talk about them with empathy, the closer we get to real solutions. Every share and every comment helps this video reach more people and spreads this critical understanding. For more stories about the psychology of our world and the power of human resilience, consider subscribing to the channel. And if you want to be part of the solution, look into organizations in your own community that support at-risk youth or advocate for trauma-informed policies. Small actions, when we all do them, can create a massive wave of change. We started with a number that nearly every person in our prisons carries a history of childhood trauma. We've seen what that number really means. It represents millions of human stories. Stories of kids like Michael, whose brains were shaped by fear, setting them on a collision course with a world that would only see their final act, not the lifetime of pain that came before it. We've also seen the hope in stories like Maria's, where one person, a teacher, a safe space, was enough to rewrite the ending. Her story is a reminder that healing is always possible. The line between a victim and a perpetrator is often blurry. It's not a sharp divide, but a thin membrane that people are pushed across by forces that started long before they had any say. Acknowledging this doesn't erase responsibility. It expands it. It forces us to accept that the responsibility for crime doesn't just belong to the person who commits it, but also to the society that failed to protect them when they were a child. As long as we keep asking, "What is wrong with you?" we will be stuck in a cycle of punishment that solves nothing. We'll keep filling our prisons with the walking wounded, punishing them for the very injuries we failed to prevent. But if we can find the courage to ask a different question, what happened to you? Everything can change. That question is the key. It unlocks the door to understanding, to empathy, and to real solutions. It allows us to see the scared child behind the hardened criminal. It pushes us to move from a world of punishment to one of prevention and healing. And in that shift, we will find our best hope for a safer and more just world for every single one of us.